what he means by God I'll get to in a moment. But in a very broad sense, because the universe has this capacity for feeling, and the elements in it, the events that make it up, have this capacity for feeling, there's something responsive about nature that was left out in the abstract ideas, and primary qualities, and quantitative approach or abstractions of modern thought. And that responsiveness that's there in each event allows for the universe to feel the presence, the attraction of God in a way that's not going to show up in a quantitative approach to the natural world, which is what science takes. Whitehead loved science. He did not in any way want to present himself as someone who was opposed to science, but he said science is just abstract. It leaves out most of what's really going on in the world. And what's really going on are these events that are feeling and aiming, and the organism is aiming toward more intense beauty. But that can't happen unless there is some source of inspiration to this universe. And that's what God is, a source of inspiration offered to the universe at a level of its existence which lies beneath or beyond the plane of scientific abstractions. And this God is the source not just of the order that exists in the universe, but also of the adventurousness, of the processive aspect of the cosmos. God is source not just of order, but also of novelty. I'll come back to that in a moment. Anyway, once you conceive of the natural world as being made up not of impersonal elemental atoms, but of moments of experience or occasions or events of feeling, then you have the basis for understanding how God acts in the world. God doesn't act by becoming part of a matter-energy continuum. Most contemporary scientific atheism, when it asks for the evidence of God, is looking for some sort of disturbance at the level of measurements that science can undertake, something that shows up in a microscope or a telescope. Almost all of the so-called new atheism is based on that assumption. And when the new atheists define faith as belief without evidence, what they mean is scientific evidence. But for Whitehead and process theology, there's another kind of evidence which can only be felt by subjects. And everything is a subject. There is no such thing as an impersonal object, since everything is part of the process. The process is made up of events. These events are essentially moments of feeling. So everything that exists is a subject. There is no such thing as an object. Objects are scientific abstractions, which scientists have pulled out of nature so that it can be measured. And then they identify, as modern philosophy has identified concrete reality with those abstractions. Whitehead calls it the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. But anyway, as a result of the inspiration that God gives to the universe, that allows the universe to feel the presence of God at each level in its own way, in a rudimentary way, this God is the source of all possibilities that exist and that are eventually actualized in the process of the world's evolution. So that there's something about nature underneath it all that has a kind of striving, or you might say anticipatory quality. Other philosophers of a kind of process mentality like Charles Peirce and Charles Hartshorne talk a lot about this anticipatory aspect of nature. And so did Teilhard de Chardin also felt that there was something anticipatory about the cosmos. And what makes this anticipation possible is that it's responding to a field of possibilities that are offered to it by God. So as the process goes on, the striving becomes more and more intense and eventually takes the form of senses, or sentient life. And then it takes the form of consciousness and self-consciousness when humans come onto the scene. But we are not a major break in the continuum of nature. We are an intensification of what's already happening at the very most rudimentary levels of nature. And then when we are inspired to do the good, morality and ethics are also part of this universe's response to the inspiration offered to it by God. God, who, as we'll see in a moment, is, for Whitehead, the chief exemplification of beauty. And then worship. Process thought, even in Whitehead's philosophy, found a place for worship. And what is worship from the process perspective? Worship is the way in which conscious beings allow themselves to be synthesized into this movement, into God, that we call the cosmos. We don't think about that when we go to Mass, but process theologians do. Some things going on in the Eucharist, for example. Teilhard had Drew brought out in his article the other day, had a very, very broad cosmic view of what's going on in the Eucharist. So also, process theology has a very broad sense of what happens in religious worship in general. And worship is allowing oneself to be synthesized by this larger adventure that's going on and that is inspired by God and ultimately has its destiny in God as well. Okay, so that's the basic outline of it. So what's really going on in the universe then is that this organism, which we call the cosmos, is aiming toward instantiation or intensification of beauty. But what is beauty? Beauty, for Whitehead, is the synthesis of novelty on the one hand and order on the other, of diversity on the one hand and unity on the other, of contrast on one side and harmony on the other. If you have just novelty without order, then that leaves you with chaos. But if you have order without novelty, then that leaves you with monotony. And I can't go into it tonight, but Whitehead also has to explain what evil is in his universe. But there are two kinds of evil. There's the evil of chaos or disorder, but there's also the evil of monotony. And the evil of monotony means clinging to low-grade forms of harmony when it's relevant in the process to bite off more novelty and nuance and diversity. It's the tendency to cling when the time for integration of novelty is past. And there's a lot of that that goes on in human life. Yeah. But in general, it's part of the evil that exists in nature itself. So if you have one without the other, novelty without order, order without novelty, then that's evil. So the cosmic process has to walk this razor's edge between the Scylla of novelty and the Charybdis of order. And that means that the cosmos is a risky sort of thing, which makes the label adventure quite appropriate to what's going on in the cosmos. You can see now how different this was from the way in which the Platonic and Aristotelian world thought of natural existence as well as human existence as well. Order, also in traditional classical theology, was elevated above novelty. Novelty often appeared to be demonic. And what we have to do, what the good life would mean is just clinging to order as long as we can and putting down anything that interrupts the status quo, as it were. Okay, so this is the general picture.